out in '96, and we self-distributed, and then we distributed on video, and then with the help of Vermont Public Television, national PBS agreed to play the film, but they said, we're not going to give you any money. And so I thought, well, the only way, if you're in Kansas or California or Florida, you would know about this movie, since it didn't have a national release, is if we do something so nutty that it would get noticed. And so I went to Fred and I said, Fred, what if you actually ran for the U.S. Senate for real in Vermont? He was like, okay. So Fred Tuttle ran for real in the GOP primary in Vermont against a guy who had just moved up from Massachusetts. And this guy spent $500,000 of his own money, and we spent $68, and Fred won. The dividing point, the watershed moment in the campaign was they had a debate on Vermont Public Radio, and each candidate got to ask each other questions. And so Fred's, which we came up with, was he asked them things like to pronounce names of towns in Vermont, which the guy got wrong. But the most famous question was, Fred said, how many tits are on a cow? And the guy got it wrong. He seemed like he hadn't been in Vermont very long. Yeah. And then after Fred won, he was up against Patrick Leahy, who was a sort of unbeatable incumbent. So I actually wanted to push Fred to run a little harder, but he was more like, no, you know, it was during Monica Lewinsky, and Fred said, I don't want to go to Washington, actually. let Pat win. So he more or less endorsed his opponent.
After he won?
After he won the primary, yeah. Yeah, so that was a famous race. And then we got it from both sides, because the Republicans hated us, because Fred wasn't running a real race, and then actually Leahy's chief of staff, you know, shouted at me a bunch because they were scared of Fred because he was really a true populist candidate. So, any questions about the making of, or?
How did you first learn about Fred's, you know, I mean, was he really interested in doing this initially?
Well, I'd made a movie before called Vermont is for Lovers, that was just starred my neighbors pretty much, and he was so funny in that, in his cameo. He had one scene that I thought, okay, I should make a movie with Fred as the star. And so it was about the time of Ross Perot running, '92, and I thought, well, if such a nutty guy like that can get some traction, it made sense that someone like Fred Tuttle, who never had even thought about politics, would make a really incredible candidate, or non-credible, or something. Yeah. Yeah.
So you're from Tunbridge too?
Right. Yeah, I just live up the road from Fred. So my whole life, you know, I've known him or known of him, but I was just a kid, and we'd drive by his farm, and it wasn't really until I started making movies about my neighbors in Tunbridge that I really got to know them. And then Fred and I had this, like, we were like married for 6 years practically, because we went to all these festivals and we self-distributed, and then when he ran for the U.S. Senate, it was the same thing all over again. It just got weirder and weirder. I mean, little things like, eventually, Fred and Jesse Ventura, the governor from the wrestler who was eventually elected in Minnesota, they were the sort of two really funny human interest stories during that '98 campaign. And so Fred was invited to come. Like 1 week, the Tonight Show and Letterman and Rosie O'Donnell all called and wanted Fred on the show. And we could only do one because they were competing with each other. So we picked the Tonight Show because actually Fred had a grandchild out in California. And but then they informed us that because he was an actual candidate running, we were going to have to get releases from not only Senator Leahy, but all the other crackpots running for the U.S. Senate, you know, and the Get High Party and the Libertarians. And so I went around and had to, you know, convince these people that they weren't going to get on the Tonight Show, but only Fred was the only one they really wanted on. But there were all sorts of unusual things like that. So we went out in the middle of the campaign. We went out to Burbank, California, campaign. But it was fun to sort of, we had a 5 cent a plate fundraiser. And we lost money on it because the portalette costs like $70.
What did you serve?
Everybody just brought stuff. And what else? I mean,
You're inspiring us to try this.
Right,
ourselves.
yeah. But it was nerve-wracking for me, though, because as Fred's handler, Fred wasn't, I mean, he would just say whatever came into his head, which the movie, there's no screenplay to the movie. It's just me sort of slightly coaching Fred or trying to, push him one way or another. But there was one of the first debates they had, a radio debate on a country station. Somehow the Second Amendment came up about firearms, and Fred's like, "What's the Second Amendment?" Somebody running for the U.S. Senate is like, "I've never heard of the Second Amendment." It was a handler's nightmare.
Is he still around?
No, he passed away in 2003. Yeah, he was. His knees were really so bad, so he'd spent the day digging potatoes on his knees, and then came home and I guess was having dinner and was laughing at some joke and just fell over dead. So that's the way to go. But his son was there, so it was actually kind of nice. I mean, Fred's story is, a lot of this is true as far as he really did drop out of school in the 10th grade. And now his son, who was adopted, is the second in charge of the archaeological dig at Petra in Jordan. And so he's the one who takes Laura Bush around, or Joe Biden. So it's pretty amazing to go in one generation from 10th grade Fred Tuttle to a guy who's going to be the head of the Petra dig in a couple of years.
But his father passed away before he was elected?
Yeah, his father died before the end of the movie, actually. So that he didn't die too long after he was driving down the road there. Fred was totally terrified that his father was going to crash, because he hadn't been driving for a few years, and we were like, "Come on, Joe, drive." And he was like, "Okay."
He really did lunge towards that.
He did, and that was accidental, and the sound man was crouched in the car, and that's the reason we caught that, is because I was just about to begin filming. I was like, "Okay, anytime," and just started towards the house, which wasn't planned. That's when Fred said, "I want to ride in the back seat." Yeah.
How did you obtain the cast? I mean, is it just going around to the local town folk, or?
Yep. Yeah, they're almost all my neighbors, or Fred's opponent is my mother's boyfriend.
You like him, huh?
And it's like one of his daughters is one of the Long John nymphs, and his son is his aide-de-camp. Who else? I mean, all the handlers are just Tunbridge people. And we really campaigned, so people were, like at the Tunbridge Fair, people were really confused, like, because, how would you know the difference between Fred Tuttle and a lot of people running for office? Just when we filmed in Burlington or at the Tunbridge Fair, people would be like, "Oh, good luck," that's what they're saying, like, give them hell. And Fred in his own mind was thinking, like, "I will give them hell." Yeah.
How did you do that amazing special effects with the car doors?
I was laying like this. And actually my mother was the one in the back of the head. But that scene took forever because I'd said, okay, Fred, he couldn't memorize any lines. It actually made it worse if you said, say this. And so the same thing, I said, okay, we're going to do like one feint here and then a double here, and he kept getting it wrong. You do the double first, and it had to perfectly match what he was doing with the other side. So that's why eventually I think I came up with the idea of him locking it, because I wanted to do it in one take, and it just never was going to happen. Yeah. But a lot of it's just is luck. Like I was during the sequence where the cow eats the pink fly, I was trying to put it on the cow's horn, and it fell on the ground, and the cow ate it. And I was like, "Oh, this is way better." I never would have thought like a cow will eat a pink piece of paper, but it just gobbled them up. And then I started doing like this.
I'm just amazed, you wrote that whole thing. You came up with it.
Well, yeah, I guess writing is,
Yeah, no screenplay.
But that's
yeah,
still
it's just notes pretty
unbelievable.
much. Yeah. And the guy, the newscaster who really holds it together, he was from Channel 31 up in, I think, Lebanon, was a real newscaster, so that really helped a lot. And the reporter who interviews Fred over and over was a real reporter, so that helped to have some professionals involved, as opposed to me. Yeah. Connie?
I was just going to ask how much it cost to make the film, how you raised the money, and taking a really clever idea that clearly took effort to execute and distribute. You know, where was your motivation?
How many questions?
Yeah, exactly. So how much did it cost?
I think the film cost about $100,000, including everything. And then, as I said, we self-distributed. I think the film grossed like over $1 million for theaters. I mean, we ended up with like 10,000 each or something. But it made a lot of money for a lot of businesses, so that was good. Because we sold so many videos in like bookstores and feed stores, animal stores. I mean, I still run into it in the weirdest places.
And that didn't scare you? That, okay, I'm going to make this movie and I need to find $100,000 to do it? And
Oh, right, you asked what, it was, I think that one was a limited partnership, so I had to find 10 people to give me $10,000, which was, it's always hard. I mean, it'll never be, you know, it's never easy finding 10 people with $10,000 to essentially, I mean, those people all made their money back, which was really nice. And then they all rolled it over and made, so I could make my next film, which then did make money, so they were all out eventually.
And what are you working on now?
Now I'm working on a film called Oxymorons, which is a comedy about sustainability and teenagers. Teenagers are funny, sustainability's not, so it's taken me 7 years, and it's just like rolling a rock up this stairs, and it keeps rolling back down. But it'll be soon done, and hopefully come here.
How much help did how many takes did the dog and the camera do?
Oh, right. Not many. Maybe just one, I think, because it was my dog, and I'm holding his paws. He was really unhappy. And he put cat food in the camera, but it looks really good. I'm amazed. Like, he even sort of like puts his, like a cat almost, like his paw. Yeah. So that was, yeah, it was fun, because like all the animals are either my sheep or my dog or Fred's cats, and so we had unprofessional pet actors too.
No animals were harmed.
That's right, yeah.
What, after all that experience, would you say was, the most rewarding part about it for you, personally?
I think, you never, I think, set out to make a movie that has sort of universal appeal, or it's a mistake for low budget, because it's very hard to market a film where you can't, pinpoint your audience. In this film, it has fans, like 5-year-olds liked it, and college kids said, "Oh, this is the best film to get stoned to and watch." And then, I'm still playing it to elder hostels, at the Hotel Coolidge and White River, so it did have this amazing universal appeal, and I think that's really probably Fred Tuttle, and just the film has an innocence that I think also reflected sort of where I was in movie making too, that you really have to be pretty naive, I think, in a lot of ways, to just jump in and make a feature film and risk $100,000 and use unprofessional non-actors and hope that somebody will distribute it. In this case, no one did. So it was really nice that it became such a sort of phenomenon in ways I never would predict it. And then my next film, which is in a lot of ways a better movie, and has some people like it a lot more, but it didn't catch on in the same way. It's not as funny, and it didn't have Fred Tuttle. It has another great guy too, who died before it was done. So maybe that film would have done the same if the star had lived. But working with septuagenarians and octogenarians, you never know how long they're going to be with you. And now that's the reason I started making this trilogy about my town, was that they were all 70, 80, and 90-year-olds. And now they've all passed away, so I did it just in time, I think.
Yeah, I like his partner who was putting flyers under all the.
Right, his name's Kermit. Yeah,
Yeah.
Kermit Glines. He lived in '99. Yeah,
That's great.
yeah. He was really amazing. So, and now, I mean, it was just the sort of stories. I mean, if I could have done a movie about all the stories I heard as I was driving Fred and Kermit to places, it actually would have been a lot better in some ways. Because almost all of the best stuff happens off camera when you're making movies like this. I mean, you keep the best stuff, but by far, like when people they're relaxed and their guards down, they tell funnier stories, and that just unguarded moments are really much better than you get on camera.
What made you originally want to do a film about your neighbors?
I just wanted to document them before they all passed away. And instead of doing like a talking heads movie, I thought, okay, I'll try to think of some way to make it at least entertaining for an audience rather than just sitting through 2 hours of interviews. So that I'm still experimenting with this, but so that's why it's a hybrid of fiction and nonfiction.
You available on DVD yet?
It's been out on DVD. I brought a few. If anybody's desperate to spread Fred, I'll they're $10, just my cost. Just because DVD is going to go away here in a few years, so I better get rid of them all. What was that? It was interesting. I mean, just that, like we were talking with Barry earlier of how the film was popular enough. So first it was on VHS, and then we had to decide at some point to go to DVD. And I think I probably waited too long probably for DVD, because being in Tunbridge, Vermont, I'm always behind, right? I should be doing Blu-ray now, but it'll probably never come out on Blu-ray.
Did he come up with the line about you had spent enough time in the barn, it's time to...
No, I wrote that. Yeah.
You got it. That
Yeah.
was awesome.
And those were the hardest lines, like that one, and then the one at the end where I called, the people called collect, and I answered the charges.
Yeah.
That took like 18 takes for Fred to do a one line. But it was nice to have a mix between that and Fred's like lines that are surreal, like I'm promising a chicken in every egg.
Right.
That's like way more genius than anything I could. Yeah.
The sober people.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah. And one of my favorite lines, which sort of ties into my next movie, is that unfortunately, being non-professionals, that the sort of the way the line's delivered isn't like a joke line, so you miss a lot of Fred's lines, and plus he's hard to understand a lot. So when the handlers ask him, what are we going to do when we run out of oil? And Fred says, well, just be cold. I think it's like the most brilliant line. Like, it's so New England and Yankee and like this.
And he thought it through.
Right, yeah. It's like, and I'm sure the Tuttles, ran out of wood in April some year, and they were just cold for a month. So it made total sense. But there's something very, very right about, it's like where we're going to be in 50 years. It'll just be cold. Any more questions?
Are there any other unintended consequences of the movie? You mentioned this actually turned into a real campaign.
Right, yeah.
That who knows, that may have influenced the course of history in strange ways that we don't understand.
In some ways, yeah.
Presidential candidate from Vermont later,
Right.
And all that. But anything else where you see sort of the domino effect of this?
As far as like the politics go?
Yeah, or your own life.
It didn't really change Fred or me that much. The one thing that was nice was the movie, it's a bit fictional where Fred's wife dies at the beginning. She really didn't die, but his wife, who was briefly in Vermonters for Lovers, the movie I made before, and she and Fred really did not get along. Their marriage was really sort of, they were hostile to each other in a lot of ways. So when I suggested making this, I said, oh, Dottie, will you be in this movie? And she was like, no, I'm absolutely not going to be in this movie. You go do your foolishness with Fred, but I'm not going to be part of this movie. So, and Fred had been married 3 times. He actually, his first wife was from Concord, and I think that wife's mother said, no, these Tuttles they're crazy. come back to Concord. So she came back to Concord, left Fred. The next wife, he caught in bed with a neighbor. a friend of his, so that was wife number 2. And the third wife, this was the one he was with, was her husband had abandoned her with 2 teenage kids up in Maine, and through, I think, was some sort of, what's his name, Norman Vincent Peale? It was sort of eHarmony of the 1950s. And so she came down to Tunbridge and was never really happy there, and their marriage, I think, got only worse from there. So this is what I was coming to. I didn't realize this, growing up until I finally started spending time with the Tuttles. Then, so she couldn't be in the movie. We killed her off. She wasn't in any of the movie. And then the first 6 months or so of self-distribution, same thing. She was just mad all the time because Fred had become sort of this little underground sensation. And then finally, when the film opened at Kendall Square in Boston, she came down only because I think her son was in town. He was at Brown and he had come up for the opening. And all of a sudden, it seemed like slowly she sort of realized that now she was Mrs. Fred, and she was sort of a celebrity too. And she was far more interested in movies. Like she's seen every Western ever made. Fred didn't really care about movies, but she loved movies. So then over the next 4, 5, 6 years, slowly she sort of embraced her role as I'm part of this. And their marriage, actually, they got along so much better in the last 10 years of their life. So it was really, that was an unintended consequence. And she just passed away this year. Yeah.
Did you get any rewards for or recognition for the film in any of the festivals?
It won some festivals, but it got rejected by Sundance, and at that point I think I just thought, well, if it's not going to be in a really good festival, I might as well just start playing it. It didn't really seem like, in distributors too, they said, well, here's a movie about politics, which those aren't usually box office successes. It's about this 70-year-old farmer guy who no one's ever heard of. They're not gunplay or car chases, nudity, none of those sort of titillating things. None of that's in this
There
film.
was an orgy.
I should have said that, yeah. So, instead of just waiting, trying for a year to get into certain festivals, I could sort of see the writing on the wall, and that's when Fred and I went ahead and did it ourselves, which, it's become, in some ways, one of the very few successes of self-distribution, but I couldn't have predicted that. It was much more, it's just weird how certain films, whether it's self-distributed films or even, the King's Speech, no one really knows when they are just coming out if they're going to be, minor hits, major hits, cult hits, or disappear forever and maybe end up on a DVD over, used DVDs at Pitchfork. So it's really hard to tell. Yeah.
I really thought at the end, when Fred was sitting in front of the fence in front of the White House, that his little sign was going to come up, Fred, why not?
Yeah. It's just funny also, I was just watching that how all films are sort of hostage to the time they were made in, and being a pre-9/11 film, you can't sit there anymore, and you certainly can't sit there and chew tobacco anymore and have me set up a camera, 10 feet away and photograph that. So, but that's true with the clothes people wear and cell phone. Technology is a big giveaway. When you see, movies from the 90s with cell phones like this. Or even Fred's Chevy Citation car is such a sort of icon for me from this film, but you don't see many driving around anymore. Yeah. No, it's a bit, it's not painful, but it's you always, when you watch films, years later, I always think, oh, there's so many more moments that I could have made this funny. And you sort of kick yourself, but you just also sort of have to accept that, it must, writers who write novels must think oh, I wish I had changed that sentence or put in a different chapter. You must get the same feeling. And it's the same with movies, I think, too. Because now I'm looking at it, I think, wow, I could have tightened the movie in a lot of places. I could have made it much funnier, more stuff like the car door scene. I should have figured out a few more gags like that. But actually, the film, it was almost done in 1992, and then in 1993 I went back and filmed a lot more gags, and that really helped the film a lot. Like the the big sign on top of the car.
Yeah.
That was the next year, and all those, you know, like the pink flyer stuff, like the ski pole out the window and things like that. So it did help, like those tiny little details. Just you need a certain mass of them, it seems, to make a comedy work. And I don't think there was probably a movie, or it wouldn't have been the movie it was before that.
I'm surprised some candidate would borrow that clip from when he's digging the hole, but.
Yeah. And then we had to put down an old horse. And so the backhoe had come and dug this huge hole, and I thought, oh, we have to do something with this hole. Yeah. You can see there wasn't a lot of thought here. And then the orbiting scene with the school children was, I had actually worked in a play school for a short period, and I'd done that with these 4-year-olds, and I thought, if I ever make a movie, I should do this. And it fit in this as far as Fred, you know, he's campaigning with all the people who can't vote. He's a winner with 4-year-olds, but first graders, but none of the voting public. But it was a really fun scene to do, and it like that would never end up in a Hollywood movie because it's such a ridiculous detour. But as a standalone, it's such a nice scene too. And that's like I've learned a lot. I mean, this movie, I think my next movie's going to be a lot more like than Nosy Parker in some ways, just as far as what I've learned about comedy and what people like. And it's, I mean, there's not much of a story to this movie. But I think if you have this, in this anyway, you're interested in Fred Tuttle, but also just scene by scene, I think audiences will stick with a film if it's funny or amusing and entertaining, or you know, it doesn't have to be suspenseful all the way through. Comedy is a completely different language than melodrama or thrillers and things like that. So you just have to just make it entertaining I think Matt Groening said something like every 30 seconds you need a laugh. Just, when you think of a 90-minute film, that's a lot of work. But then The Simpsons has been running for a long time, so you must have something. Well, thank you.
Thank you.